We did the Vygotsky social cultural theory. A quick overview of what this theory exactly is. It's a social development theory. Vygotsky believed that a child's cognitive development and ability to learn are deeply influenced by others. He meant by adults, older peers, and social interactions and cultural interactions that you may take. Vygotsky's theory emphasizes how important the role of social interaction and cultural interactions are important to the development of a child's intelligence. So Vygotsky very deeply believed that if you were around more social interactions and you had a more diversity cultural background, that you had more intelligence than the people that didn't have that. This theory was utilized in the early education classrooms.
Hello, my name is Noemi, and I will also be covering overview. So this is some of the main ideas that Vygotsky covered in his sociocultural theory. Starting with the role of social interaction and culture in development and higher-order thinking skills, Vygotsky thought that cognitive development cannot be truly understood without taking into account historical and social context of an individual. He emphasized the importance of social interaction and how working with others can help enhance knowledge and the learning experience. Secondly, Vygotsky underlined core themes in sociocultural learning, which were emphasis of social, historical, and cultural interactions, the zone of proximal development, and psychological tools encourage the development of higher mental functions. Like before, Vygotsky emphasized social, historical, and cultural interactions, as he believed that it was essential to take those aspects into account when using the concept of the ZPD, or zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is thought to be the distance between the actual development level of an individual and the potential development level when collaborating with peers or with guidance, which he called scaffolding. He believed that the ZPD was a more accurate and efficient way to decide learning and could help a child develop. Lastly, Vygotsky thought that language was important, as he believed that it was a medium between how a child interacted with the world and how they internalized information.
So here's some background on Vygotsky and his sociocultural theory. Before Vygotsky developed the sociocultural theory, he pursued literature, education, and psychology. He studied the role of social and cultural factors that affect human consciousness. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory was developed in the 1920s to the 1930s in the Soviet Union. The sociocultural theory is rooted in the post-revolutionary era and followed the 1917 Russian Revolution. The core idea surrounding his theory is that cognitive development is influenced by societal interactions, language, and culture. At the time the sociocultural theory was developing, Russia was undergoing a massive transformation and was focused on educational and social reform. Vygotsky challenged behaviorism, which focused on observable behavior, and he was inspired by Paget's cognitive theory and Gestalt psychology, which emphasized the social and cultural environment. Philosophically, Vygotsky believed that thinking is a social process and that human consciousness is shaped through activities, labor, and social context. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory provided a model for new education techniques that focused on social interaction rather than memorization. He supported the goal of inclusive education, and his theory helped explain how language, especially in early childhood, drives thought and learning.
Now I'll be discussing the lifelong timeline and biography on Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky was born into an art and literature-loving family in what is now Belarus on November 17, 1896, and was raised in Gomel. In 1917, Vygotsky earned a law degree at Moscow State University, where he studied a range of topics including sociology, linguistics, psychology, and philosophy. In 1924, Vygotsky was subsequently invited to join the Moscow Institute of Experimental Psychology. At the institute, Vygotsky served as a teacher and researcher for 9 years. Between the years of 1925 and 1933, Vygotsky became a major figure in post-revolutionary Soviet psychology. He studied the role of social and cultural factors in the making of human consciousness. Unfortunately, in 1934, Vygotsky dies on June 11th from a tuberculosis relapse in Moscow at age 37.
Hi, good morning. My name is Angel, and my part was significance and applications. So, now we're going to talk about why Vygotsky's theory actually matters, because it's not just an abstract idea from the past, basically. His sociocultural theory has a huge influence on modern education and psychology, especially in the way we teach, support, and understand children. It shifted the focus from just what a child knows to how they learn, who they learn with, and what role their environment plays in that journey. So today we're going to dive in some of the real world ways we see this theory in action. First up, education, rethinking how we teach. One of the biggest impacts of Vygotsky's work is in education. His idea that learning is a social process totally changed the game. Before Vygotsky, a lot of education was about the role of memorization and individual performance. But he showed us that learning happens best with others through interaction, conversation, and support. Let's take a look at collaborative learning. For example, Vygotsky believed that students can reach higher levels of understanding, when they work together. That's why group projects, peer tutoring, and class discussions were so important. When students share ideas and challenge each other's thinking, they're not just helping each other, they're actually building knowledge together. That's what Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development, or ZPD, the sweet spot where students are capable of learning something new, but only with a bit of guidance or support. Next, we'll talk about play-based learning, which is especially relevant in early childhood education. Vygotsky saw play not just as fun time, but as a powerful learning tool. Through imaginative play, kids try on different roles, test new ideas, and practice problem solving. In fact, New Zealand's early childhood curriculum called Tiraki, hope I'm saying that right, is built almost entirely around Vygotsky's ideas. It encourages kids to learn by exploring, creating, and playing in social settings. His theory also transformed how we assess students instead of only measuring what a child cannot do on their own. Vygotsky encouraged teachers to think about what a student could achieve with help. That's a huge difference. It means that assessments can now be used to identify a child's potential, not just their current performance. This approach helps students design better support systems, tailor learning to each other's needs. Next, we'll talk about child development and psychology. Outside the classroom, for example, Vygotsky's ideas had a big impact on the field of developmental psychology. His theory helps psychologists understand that development doesn't happen in a vacuum. A child's growth depends on a lot of time on the quality of their interactions, whether that's with caregivers, teachers, siblings, or even the culture around them that they grew up with. So now, psychologists pay more attention to things like language exposure, social experience, and access to cultural tools. Talking to children regularly, reading with them, or encouraging them in problem-solving conversations are always adults can support their cognitive growth. Vygotsky's influence also shows up in how we design early intervention programs, especially before kids who may be at risk developmentally. And let's not forget how this theory helps inform modern approaches to things like therapy, parenting strategies, and inclusive education. Vygotsky's message was simple but powerful. If you want to understand how a child learns, we have to look at who's around them, what tools they're given, and how they're being supported.
Hello, this is Juliana Rodriguez Wharton, and I will be going through the critical analysis. Limitations: lack of attention or emotional development. Vygotsky's theory is criticized because he doesn't address the influences of emotional and social emotional aspects of development. Vague explanations of internalization. Even though Vygotsky said that internalization is a cornerstone of his theory, he doesn't go into details about the mechanisms that make this process occur. This is criticized because of how cultural settings and social interactions affect a person's cognitive development. And the last limitation is incomplete work. Vygotsky died at 37 years old in 1934, leaving many of his manuscripts incomplete. Strengths: significant educational implications. Supports collaborative learning, reciprocal teaching. Zone of proximal development, ZPD. The space between what a learner can do without assistance and what a learner can do with adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. And the last strength is cultural influence on learning. Vygotsky was one of the first psychologists to acknowledge that cultural influences cognitive development.
I believe Vygotsky's sociocultural theory is not only still relevant but also essential. Given the growing emphasis on diversity, inclusivity, and collaborative learning in modern classrooms, his theory offers a framework that enables educators to meet students halfway. Digital learning has become very popular and it is commonly used by teachers and parents. Students now have access to a broader community due to global connectivity. It could be through peers, online tutors, and interactive technologies. It just amplifies Vygotsky's point that cultural and social context are crucial to learning.